Hi, welcome, bienvenue to Lost in Translation, where I explore with guests a word and draw upon their experience, life story, culture, and point of view so no one gets lost in translation. I'm your host, Cynthia Bernard, and together let's bridge gaps, embrace different cultures, and honor every single voice. Welcome to Lost in Translation, where we unlock the true meaning behind the words, ensuring no one ever gets lost along the way. Hi, everyone. So, for this episode, we'll explore the word premiere. And for me today, it's kind of a full circle moment. I will talk to a person that's known me before I was even born. Gilles Ouellette is born and from Canada. He was a drum major at the same time as my mom was. I think he known me when I was her belly, actually, but we'll see. And he's one of the brave, international, and rare person that moved to the US, and I think now is completely dedicated to the marching arts. Born in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, Gilles started his drum corps career with the Patriotes de Port-Cartier, where he began in the drum line, and then eventually took up on the role of drum major for the last 2 summers. During his college years, he was introduced to the world of the Winter Guard by his dear friend Mimi Racine. He first worked with the Troubadours de Victoriaville with her. Gilles has an impressive background in color guard, having left his mark on renowned organizations like Phoenix de Victoriaville, Sonore de la Prairie, Black Watch, St. John's of Beverly, Dobbins Bennett, SEI, St. Brennan's, Mount Juliet High School, and so many more. But his contributions to the marching arts extends far beyond that. As a freelance visual designer, technician, and educator, Gilles has shared his experience with winter guards, winter percussion ensembles, college and high school marching bands, and drum and bugle corps across both United States and Canada. Gilles' incredible resume includes notable positions such as assistant director for the Boston Crusaders and visual designer for the Glassmen. For over a decade now, he's been part of the Spartans Drum and Bugle Corps design team and visual designer, showcasing an unwavering dedication and artistic point of view. Currently, he's also working as the program coordinator for the Spirits of Atlanta. But Gilles' contribution doesn't stop there. He is also a highly respected educator with an undeniable eye for excellence. As a GE judge for the Winter Guard International and an active member and educator for the Gulf Coast Judges Association, Gilles continuously pushes the boundaries of greatness. Not to mention, he serves as a color guard and contest coordinator for the Southerners Color Guard Circuit. Join me as we get to know Gilles Ouellette's journey, unraveling his experiences, insight, and the profound impact that he made on the world of the marching arts. Bienvenue to Gilles Ouellette. Salut.
Salut. Ça va?
Oui. So, was I right? Was I wrong? Did I add a little bit to your resume? Is that even possible?
No. En français ou en anglais?
En anglais, yeah.
In English. No, it's pretty accurate. There might have been one thing I'd like to correct.
Yeah.
Is with Spirit of Atlanta, I am the program manager, not the program coordinator. Yeah, manager. So basically, I'm part of the design team, and I am the link between the design team and the caption heads. So I help the caption head put the product on the field. That's kind of my role this coming season.
Well, thank you.
But everything else is right on point.
Cool. So for everyone that doesn't know, neither me or Gilles, or maybe just one of us, Gilles, like I said, you were a drum major, and I asked my parents yesterday because I was like, I know Gilles, like I know you, I've known of you, but I think my furthest memory I have was in the 90s when you already have moved to the US and Les Étoiles d'Or were competing with, was it St. Catherine's, I would say? Is that?
I believe that was right. Yeah, Sacred Heart or St. Catherine, one or the other.
Yeah. And then, I mean, I've known of you. We've worked together at Les Centaures. You've judged me. But every time, and that's one of the really interesting things for me with you, is that you're French speaking, but I am more comfortable. No, I'm not more comfortable. But I'm comfortable to talk to you in English because that's how we communicate most of the time since we see each other around a judging table. So you've known my parents because you were born in Montreal and you started your color guard and drum corps career here, yeah?
That is correct. So I know your parents because I even helped your parents at Les Étoiles for maybe one summer on and off. I was not a permanent staff person, but I'd go in once in a while. So after I graduated from college, I got a job in Montreal, and that's kind of how I got involved with those that were in the Montreal area. Where before that, while I was, a student in high school and in college, I was in the east part of the province. So I was mostly involved with groups from the Quebec City area and Port-Cartier, which is, if you know the geography, is in the northeast part of the state, not the state, the province.
The province, yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I've known your parents for a very long time, actually.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I think, if I'm not wrong, it's Pierre that was kind of the link between you and my parents, yeah?
Yeah, Pierre Saint-Jean?
Yeah, Pierre Saint-Jean.
Yeah, so when I started in the Winter Guard scene, as I was saying, my good friend Mimi Racine introduced me to Winter Guard, and then I went and helped out with her group at Les Troubadours. Phoenix was also from the same city, from Victoriaville. And we got to know each other through the two groups, and eventually I started working with Phoenix. So when I worked with Phoenix, it was Phoenix de Victoriaville before they moved to the Montreal, or maybe they never did move to Montreal.
I don't think
now I think about it. Yeah, it was mostly staff that were coming from there.
Yeah,
but it was Pierre Saint-Jean, Jean-Marc, Séguin,
Jean-Marc,
and myself, Carole Bertrand. We were kind of like the staff there at Phoenix, and so Pierre is really the one that really got me involved. And that's how I got involved or got to know WGI, because we brought the group. Pierre was familiar with WGI. I wasn't at the time. And then we went one year just to watch. And then we were competing a lot in the upstate New York circuit.
Yeah. And
then we eventually brought Phoenix to WGI, and it's history from there.
Yeah.
It just, yeah.
I'm always, I want to say sad, because Pierre, I think, will come up really often when I speak to Quebecers or people that I know or have known, because for me, he was mon oncle Pierre. Like, he was an uncle because he was so close from Les Étoiles d'Or, but he was involved with so many drum corps and color guard mostly. But the U.S., I think he's one of the first one, him and Bobby, which another late sad Bobby, that I wish I could have interviewed them, because they were really, for Quebec, I think, like one of the first ones that linked us to WGI and how Quebec kind of got very competitive in the 80s and 90s, I think.
That is,
maybe.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And they were the link between, and they had a lot of relationships with folks in the U.S., and that's kind of how, they're the ones that helped us bridge into the U.S. and into the WGI or even the DCI scene. Yeah. And Pierre was judging at the time in some of the local circuits, up maybe, in the Massachusetts area, and also in upstate New York. And so he's the one that really got us involved to know and to discover that part of the equation. But
yeah, after my father, he was the first one I remember after a competition in like the 90s, mid 90s, who sat me down. I was 12 and I was already really curious with the sheets and all that. And he's like, let me tell you how to run a critique. And I think about him like really often. And now that anyways. So I think I'll think about him a lot. So before we go into maybe a little bit deeper questions or more.
Sure.
This episode is about premiere. So for you, when you think about the words, is there any meaning or any stories that you think about, or any highlight that you got feeling the word premiere?
Oh, Lord, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Well, premiere is a first of something. It's a beginning of a season, chapter. There's a lot of premieres, right? When you get involved in this activity, either it's through the different groups you teach. Even a new season is a premiere in a lot of ways. That's how I see it. So it's the birth of something to become. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but
it does.
When you ask me that question, that's what comes to mind anyway.
It's all about this. I will talk to a lot of people, and I'm pretty sure no one is going to have the same answer, and that's what's so interesting. Yeah. And I was not going to say that we have the same background, but has French-speaking people, sometimes words are so different, especially when I started teaching. That's when I realized that loss in translation makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So for you, you premiered here in Canada, but as a staff and as a member. But what was your first interest? Like, were you more of a drill person, of a design person, of a technician? Like, how did you?
Oh, wow. Now we're going way back, aren't we?
Yeah.
So when I was a kid, I had, I was attracted to music. That was my thing. And, the rest of my family was all in hockey. And although
really?
I loved hockey, yeah, oh yeah, my brother, my sister, my parents. And although I love hockey, I was really bad at it. I tried, and I'm like, this is really not for me. So when I moved, my parents moved to, I was in high school. I was starting high school, actually, my first year of high school, 8th grade in Quebec. We, my dad made a change in his life, and we moved to Port-Cartier, this little town in the northeast part of the province. And there was a drum corps in that town. And I saw them in a parade, like in June. I think it might have been for La Fête Nationale on June 24th. And my eyes were like got really big, and I'm like, oh Lord, this is exactly what I want to do. So the following September, when they were recruiting, I joined, and I really wanted to be a baritone player.
Okay.
But everybody, there was quite a bit of people in the horn line, and they're like, no, you got to play the drums. You got to play the drums. We need some strong people, physically. We need guys and stuff on the drum line. So I said, oh, okay, I'll try it, and that lasted, 5 years. I started off, my first year I was a tenor drum, and then I ended up going on snares. And then when I left, the last 2 years, so I was 20 and 21. I was going to college out of town, so I wasn't around. And, back then, drum corps was a weekend thing, right? It's like everybody rehearsed every weekend, and we even rehearsed twice a week, if I remember correctly. So I couldn't attend all those rehearsals, so I decided that I might just not do drum corps that year. And then I came back in May, and I just couldn't live without it. And they were like, hey, we really need a drum major. The one that we have is not going to be able to finish the season, so I did that, and I guess I was good at it from what they tell me. And I marched the last 2 summers of my my drum corps member career as a drum major, and that last year. And then to add to that, I was always intrigued or interested in the drill, the staging, the marching, cool. And that was my big thing. And one of the reasons why I wanted to be a baritone is because I wanted to be able to move on the field, where the drums at the time, was kind of like up and down the 50 and left and right. And, it was kind of like a windshield washer on a car, just back and forth. But so during that time, I was always interested in talking to the visual staff and just trying to learn. And it was kind of self-taught, I guess. And then the last 2 years, when I became the drum major, I started helping out. Teaching the drill, and then I got really involved with our drill writer, and he introduced me to how to do this, how you do that, and then I was like, I'm gonna write drill someday. So when I aged out, I taught that same group for 1 year as a drill person, and then I started writing shows for little groups. And I wish I could remember. It was a group up in Saint-Pamphile. I can't remember the name of it, but. So I wrote, that was my very first drill show. And a little story to go with that, if I may. I came back home from college, and we were going to have our first drill camp. And I borrowed my dad's car. I was so excited. I was going to drive to St. Pamphile, which was like a 6 or 7 hour drive. And I got in the car and drove, and I got my first speeding ticket. Oh, so my whole paycheck went to pay that ticket.
But I'm pretty sure you were fine, because for most of us, when we start, if we end up at zero, we're okay. We're kind of like
right. Well, it didn't I ended up paying my gas on my own, because that money went to pay the ticket. So, but that was kind of funny. But and then from there, I start teaching. At the same time, I was still in college and all that, and then that's when like I said, I Mimi was going to school in Quebec. She asked me if I would help her, and I helped her at Troubadour. She was also teaching another group in Quebec City that I would just go in and help a little bit. But yeah, and then, from there, just went on.
So you were more of a drill person, and then you kind of got attached to color guards because there were more color guards to work with, or more diversity, creativity, or...
Well, excuse me, the dogs are going crazy.
No, don't worry.
Yeah, so, back then, like, we're talking, when was that? That was in the 80s. Yeah, late 80s. Back then it was kind of a color guard, winter guard was a lot of like, you had your drill people and your equipment choreographer people, right? So it was kind of separated. It was a little bit like a band or a drum corps, And so I would, that's what I did. I wrote staging and I cleaned the staging, and then I went to Phoenix, and Pierre Saint-Jean was the designer, but I would be the marching tech, as and then but it was more of a team effort, but my focus was on cleaning the staging.
Okay.
And then from there, I went to Sonore.
Yeah.
And at Sonore was the same thing. I was more of a cleaning tech. And then there was a major change in the early 90s with Sonore, and then I became a little more involved in the design thing. And I got to a point where, and I was working in the corporate world I worked for 10 years in the corporate world. And I was the 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 behind a cubicle was not really something that I found pleasure. And I'm like, I gotta make a change before I get too old. And, I can't do this the rest of my life. And that's when I decided I took a leave of absence from work.
Oh, wow.
And then I moved to Massachusetts to teach band. And I was, and that's where it really all started. Like, I was a marching tech for a bunch of bands in the Boston area. And then I start designing shows for 1, and then for 2 and 3. And then it just went downhill from there. It was just uphill, not downhill, but it went really fast into the next phase of my life. So, yeah.
Wow. That was going to be my next question, but I'm happy you just like to do it. Was that how did you premiere in the US? Because for me, who's younger, like it seems to be unattainable to, well, first of all, I'm not interested to move to the US. And like you said, like how later in life I am now, I have a daughter. I'm not going to up and move to the US where there is more opportunities as far as the marching arts in general.
Right.
But it's really interesting how you've done it, and to see that it is possible. Even now, I think it's possible. You just need to do it really early on and kind of believe in your
I think art. That in my case, it was probably at the right time.
Yeah.
Back then, I was in my mid-20s, and or more so later 20s, actually, because I worked for Xerox, and I worked for Xerox for, I said 10 years, but it was probably more like 8. So I was like 28. And that's when I decided to make a change. And, I was not married. I was on my own, and I said, I can take this. It's like, I got to pick, am I going to travel the world? I could go to Asia for a month or 2 or 3, or I could go to Massachusetts and teach band. And I had some good, right. And I had contacts in Massachusetts, and that's that I got to know through Pierre Saint-Jean, which is kind of how everything gets connected, right? Yeah. And so I moved there, and I just taught band. It's kind of how it started. But I think it was easier back then. I was young. I was not afraid to take a risk. And it was also easier to travel, between the 2 countries. It was so easy back then to just go in and out. It was, you could go back and forth
and work,
and work. Right, exactly. But times have changed. I don't know how difficult it would be today. I don't really look into that, but I don't know if somebody that wanted to do it, I don't know how easy it would be to be able to work here and to.
Yeah. I think after 9/11, especially, a lot of things kind of tightened up.
Yeah.
And when I was, I shouldn't say working, but when I was involved with Caballeros, there was a director, a marching band director that was like, I want you here as the color guard director. And I didn't even know it existed. And for me, it was always kind of like, why do you want me? There's so many people here that have done drum corps forever. Yep. And he kind of looked into it to have a green card. And we're talking now, maybe beginning of the 2000s, 07 maybe. And it was almost risky to kind of have the demand of doing a green card. And if that was going to be refused, they always see it at the borders. You're going to be questioned. Are you crossing to work kind of illegally, quote unquote? And yeah, so it is possible. And for people that are international, if you want to do it, like look into it, but you kind of really need to, it's a very gutsy move to do that.
Is. It definitely is. And, I was fortunate that I had people that I knew and, I seeked legal help to make it happen. And, so I had to go through these channels, which I learned as I was living it, but it was all possible. So I'm sure it's still possible. And, it was a risk, but it was a dream, and it was something that I really worked hard at. And, and here I am. It's been over 23, actually it's been like 30 years now.
Wow.
Because I was in Boston up until 2000. So 89 to 2000, that's 11 years, right? And then I've been in Nashville now ever since that time. So that's 23 years later. And
Congrats. Before we go into the break, I have one last question, and then we'll go more into your involvements right now. But then you went onto judging. So you're an educator with, I didn't know, but with the circuit in Nashville, I guess, around, and WGI. When you're judging, is there elements that you look up on in a premiere, in a show, that you think as a design perspective there's like an overall impact and makes the show effective to begin the season? Like what should people focus, or where you look for into a premiere, into your first show that you judge?
Well, right. So let me backtrack a little bit. So when I start judging, I was mostly judging marching bands.
Okay.
And then I judged a few drum corps shows. There's a couple of years I was teaching drum corps where there was this test where they would have instructors judge a show. So you kind of signed up and you would judge a show, and it was kind of like an experiment. I think it's an experiment that they did. It lasted for maybe 2 years. So I did some of that, and I really enjoyed it. And then I said, I got to, pursue that. And I was really fortunate that when I lived in Boston, I was really close friends with people that are involved in the judging community. And I think of George Alviero being one. I mean, he lived literally 15 houses from where I was. So, I was able to, he would teach me a lot of about the judging aspect. So I've learned, and I said, I want to get involved with that. And then over the years, I was always judging, and then I started judging Winter Guard a little more. But the funny thing is that I've always dedicated my judging to design analysis.
Oh, wow.
That was my thing. And I did it here locally at the Gulf Coast Judging Association under Fred Feeney, is a circuit that services 5 circuits, color guard circuits, in the southern part of the country. So southeast part of the country. So the SCGC, which is the Nashville, Birmingham area, and then there's Gulf Coast, there's SAPA, which is Atlanta, there's Mississippi Indoor, and then there's one in Louisiana, like New Orleans, Louisiana area. So being a member of that association allowed me to travel in those 5 circuits, and Fred would assign us to different circuits from week to week. And I really started enjoying it. And then at one point I got a call from Carl Lowe.
Oh, wow.
Inviting me to join the WGI rank, but he wanted me to focus on general effect.
Makes sense.
And, well, it did make sense to me.
No, but you're right. You're right, though. Okay, so you're so right. It makes sense and I don't want to cut you and take the words and say me if I'm wrong, but it makes sense as far as giving jobs to people, because there's more GE people, so they need more of them.
Yeah.
And I had that conversation with him and Del Powers this winter.
Yeah.
This past winter. And DA is a really hard caption to get into WGI wise. Like, there's people that have been there forever and they're doing such, but then GE and DA is such and now maybe we're going to talk gibberish to people that kind of are not judging geeks, but they're so different. Like one is analysis, the other one is gut.
A reaction,
I don't want to say
right?
gut feelings, but
Yeah. And that was the thing when Carl said that, I'm like, oh my God, are you serious? I said, I'm like,
how?
I'm a pretty anal person. Like I analyze everything. I think too much. I mean, that's who I am as a person. And I'm like, I don't know that I could be good at this. And he's like, no, you're young. You got experience. We need some people, some fresh, input on that caption. I said, well, let me give it a try.
Yeah.
and then I went there and I went through the process, and you learn to judge the caption. And to go back to your original question is that, when, to me as a judge, I like to let things come at me. I don't want to dig in too fast, too quick, at the beginning of the year, especially. Yeah. So when you look at shows on the first couple of weeks, I want to absorb. I want to see what they have to offer. Everybody has something to offer, but everybody there's room for tweaking or, and making it better. So the one thing I did learn, and William Chumley, who is my caption manager, he was a great help at me, becoming a GE judge, was, to talk to the people like you and I are having a conversation right now. Yeah. It's the same thing. When you're judging, have a conversation with the people. And I always felt that my language might have been a little bit of a barrier because it's easier for me to speak in French. Ouais. Not anymore.
No,
c'est ce que je veux dire, hein?
Oui, puis, and tapes. I'm studying right now the WDI educator, whatever,
manual,
blah, blah, blah. And Rachel, who's the chief judge here, which is like, you should be involved if you're doing this, you're doing your cards. We know, I've been in the US and I've met Carlo because anyway, we should have another interview about this because Carlo is another amazing, great influence in my life. Yeah. That is kind of an outside person that didn't know me when I was born and did my first steps. And one day came up to me and said, you did the best critique out of all the groups here. And it was in Salem and it was world-class people have been there. And I was like, oh, like we're in Quebec. I was told you're competitive. Stop this. And I was like, oh my God. Like, anyway. And she was talking to me and I was like, I cannot do this or you're letting me do cassettes, they don't exist anymore, but the tapes, the same thing. Anyway,
same thing.
In English, because I'm not going to study this in English. And then it's one of the scariest things for me to try to start judge in the US is although I know the sheets and doing a tape is so hard. Maybe it's not the hardest job for everyone, but to talk while you're analyzing and looking at stuff and it's anyway, but sorry.
Right. And it is the hardest thing. It is the hardest thing. It's something that you have to learn and something you have to work at. Some people may have an ease at communicating and just throwing it out there. In my case, it was not. It was difficult because I felt sometimes that my brain was thinking in French, but then I had to say it in English. Or I would, the most difficult thing between French and English for me is that I invert my words. I'll put the adjective before the noun or I'll put it after. And I always have to think. So the brain works a little slower, So, and then I would be like, oh, do you say it this way or do you say it this way? And I would, I would hold back a little bit because I was afraid that I would make a mistake. And then I'm like, well, I'm not saying enough or I'm not saying the right thing. But I feel that I was really good at numbers, so that's another thing. Yes. And so I was able to, and that's just who I am as a person too. Math has always been my strong suit and I can manipulate numbers and I understand how to make it work. But regardless, so I had to work really hard with the communication aspect, so making commentary. But I developed over the years, because it's been some time now, where you develop a language and you, with with the access to competition suite and be able to listen to other people as a judge, and then all the great education that we get through, our caption managers or, with William, Beverly, and Curtis, and the WGI training that we went through over the years, it's allowed me to get to this point. And, so the premiere is, to me, is an opportunity for the groups to show what they have. It's an opportunity for me to give an opinion or express a feeling about it and try to work with, the groups or the directors and critique, just to say, hey, go for it. I'm the type, I'm not going to tell you what to do. Right. But I really want you to, I really want to help you how I can. And I found, and again, through William, who's always said, be Gilles. You want to be Gilles. People want to hear Gilles. They don't want to. They don't want to hear a robot say all these fancy words that you find on the back of the sheet.
Yeah.
So I tend to stay away from that, and I try to be a little more genuine, and so that it's, we're a little more relaxed. We can have a conversation, and I give you my input, and you teach me what your show's about and what you're about, and then it just becomes an exchange, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I see it. But yeah, the premiere is, to me, is the beginning of a season, is where I absorb a lot of information from the groups that I see, so that in a couple of weeks or even that day, I can start to offer hopefully some information that will help them move forward.
You're making my heart flutter. I love judging and all that. So we should definitely meet again. And I'll talk to you later. I have other judges I really want to talk to. And
absolutely. Well,
yes.
I'll tell you this. I am actually going to go, my family's still in Montreal.
Why?
So I'll be going there right after either drum corps season or band season, and I intend to stay there for 6-7 weeks. I owe that to my mom, because she's aging, and with COVID, I saw very little of her. Yeah. So my point is that I'll be making sure that I contact you. We'll have to have coffee somewhere.
Yeah, and I'll have my parents around. All right, so let's take a break and let's take a break and let's go into depth with your summer involvement.
Hey everyone, it's Jeremy, the producer from On a Water Break, the main show. And while you're enjoying this great bonus content from some amazing hosts, there's a whole other show happening with guests, news, and plenty of other fun things that you and your friends are talking about on a water break. So take a moment, go subscribe so that you can get your notifications every week for the main episode of On a Water Break. If you have news or know of somebody that would be a great guest, or maybe you would be a great guest, email us at onawaterbreakpodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget to follow us on social media at onawaterbreak. And now back to this fantastic bonus content.
And we'll see you at the show.
So welcome back. So this season is special in particular for Spirits, since it was a full year hiatus. And you've been in a long time relationships. I put S's everywhere. Relationship with. So let's go a little bit into the DCI side of things. And to make people in context, we're mid-July. You're going to air like the DCI week. So maybe there's going to be big things happening that you don't know, because we don't know the future. We wish we do. But as the program manager, how did you approach creatively this season, knowing that it was going to be a comeback and a big premiere for Spirits? If you actually did, maybe you just didn't want to think about it and just move on. How did you approach this?
Well, so at Spirit, there's a design team, and it's a collective effort. And we actually been working together since 2020, I believe, it was 2020. After 2019, we made a few changes, but we started the season in 2020, and then we shut down because of the pandemic. And we just stayed active as a design team. We would talk every week. We would talk, let's push this show and hopefully we can bring it out next year. Mm-hmm. Well, that didn't happen, right? So in 2020 in March, by the time we got to July, there was no drum corps season. So we just stayed in touch. And then there was a somewhat of a comeback season in 2021, I think it was. Yeah, 2021.
Yeah.
And we did a version of the show that we had been working on. It was a short season. We got together for 2 weeks for spring training, and then we said, we'll just get ready for the following season. So the same team started working on a show, and as you all know, it didn't happen. So here we are. What is it, like 4 years later, but 2 years later, where we had start working on this show. And so we just had been working on this show for a while now. So all of last year we would meet, once a week on a phone call, just stay in touch, stay in communication, and develop the program. And we were not sure at the time what was going to happen because, in the sense of like, who are going to be our kids? Are the kids going to come back? Are they not going to come back? Are we going to have kids? Are we, there was all these unknowns. But we said, you know what, let's just move forward with the show regardless. And we will adapt or transform because we were pretty confident that this show was going to be good,
Yeah.
So when the season started, they started recruiting. We had kids. We were, and here we are. There's a drum corps out there, but and we made some minor changes. Once we found out exactly who our kids were and what level of the students are, and just so that we could not overly challenge them, but challenge them enough to be competitive. That kind of. So we did kind of adapt, but the process was not much different, to be honest with you. We were more nervous about, are we going to be, are we going to have enough kids to make it happen? Because, when you think about that, I say this a lot. When really, 2019, March of 2020 is when Spirit kind of went at a halt. And then, we started a little bit, it was back and forth, right? In 2020, if you have kids that are 17 or 18 years old right now, they were 14, 15 they were 14 at the time, 13, some of them.
Yeah.
They didn't even know what drum corps was, half of them. They were kids in a marching band and said, someday I'm going to do this, meaning drum corps. But so it was, the hardest thing was to recruit kids and get them into the door, where up until 2019, Spirit was in a position where people would come to them.
Yeah.
We would have, we would run camps with 300 people, let's say.
Yeah.
And, we got to pick the best 150. That was not the case this year. We had to recruit really hard to the last second and try to get people in. And, and at times we had to take, people that maybe we would not have taken had we had, 300 people at the door waiting to get a spot. So that it was a totally different, it was more about the operations type of thing. But as far as the creative side and we didn't stop working the way we had worked in the past. That process was the same. It was a team effort. We, picked a concept, some music, and a visual identity, and we just developed it like any other year. I think that's what was,
So for the people that see things that link with a comeback with the theme of the show, it's good for them, but it's kind of just something that happens because it's a 4-year ago concept where you didn't know you were going to be this for so long.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
And the other thing that you're saying that is really interesting is that you can see the comeback year, which was last summer and last winter for the Winter Guard. I think the groups were pretty full in general, and Spirits didn't feel that because people that had a year off because of the pandemic were like, we're going to make it. We need, like, they had that need to finish something.
Right. Yep.
Where this year, recruiting, especially exactly in that age, like 13 to when they were 13 in the 2020, 2019, 2020, 13, there's such a gap. And you saw it, I think, especially in Independent A this past winter.
Yeah.
The groups, or even an open class, like 8 kids on the field, 5 kids. Like I don't remember that group, but made finals with 5 girls on the field. Like Lazy Eclipse, there were 10. Like it's a rebuild for a lot of people.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely tough. And here's the biggest thing to me is that coming out of the pandemic, the biggest change to dealing in our activity, teaching or running at the an activity, either it's Winter Guard or Drum Corps, it's really that we're dealing with different kinds. Kids are different. Mm-hmm. It's new times, right? They went through the pandemic, and it really changed a lot of things in their life and their parents too. It's harder to get people to volunteer and to work because people are not as available, and their priorities have shifted during those years. So we have to adapt at all level, not just, from the kids and now we adapt our shows. Now we're realizing that, and I had the fortunate experience that I was at Spartans, had a drum corps last summer. Yeah. So the challenges coming out of the pandemic, I was aware of when we, with Spartans, I'm like, okay, this is different. This is how it's different. And I was able to bring that knowledge to Spirit and say, hey, let's not forget, we're coming out of the pandemic. Kids are different. And 95% of our instructors are school teachers, educators. So they see that as well. They're like, no, kids are different. It's a different, we got to focus way more on them. They're although they're independent, they're very needy too. Like it's interesting. It's weird. So, and I'm sure that, you have, you teach kids, you taught kids, I'm sure you saw the difference coming out of it, how you have to readapt. But from the creative aspect, I think that has not, I would say that if, moving forward, I would always think about, it's always a race against time, and let's make sure that the decisions we make are going to be, we'll be able to reach the things that we envision. Because I think that time is at the essence, and we're not, we have no control over that. So we got to be wiser when we create shows. We got to be able to make sure that we going to be able to accomplish all of that in the time we have, knowing that once you hit the road on tour, there's very little rehearsal time. The weather is right now the biggest handicap. I don't know, is that the right word? The biggest challenge is dealing with the weather. I mean, it's warm all the time now. It rains a lot, and when it rains, it pours. And there's a lot of lightning. Like it's all these things that is, the either you believe in climate change or not. I can tell you, we see it in the drum corps world. It's affecting us, and so we have to think about how we're going to operate moving forward. And we're going to have to make some changes, I think, as we move forward.
Yeah. All right. So creatively, and I think there's ways to see there's two ways to see, there's a lot of angles to see things, but when you're doing a comeback, I'm going to say quote unquote comeback, or you can either hyper focus on it or not focus at all and just do the job that you've always done because you've been successful in this. So creatively, that's maybe more the way you've went, but the premiere must have been the premiere. It must have been feels were and the way feelings or the atmosphere. Were you there? Did you feel something?
It was definitely, it was an emotional journey of a day. You have your fans, your alumni, you have parents, you kids, and the name of the group that, the corps has a history, it's been around for a long time. So there was always that anticipation of like, oh my God, what is it going to be good? Is it going to work? Are people going to get excited about it? And you go through a series of emotion. So the premiere day was pretty emotional. At the end of the day, we're like, oh my Lord. No. I was like, okay, I need a 2-day vacation just to get over this. But it was all good. It was very positive, and it was, it didn't matter how complete or undone or how dirty we were, because, it was the first time in front of people and there was little things that work and didn't work. To see the reaction of the people sitting in the stands and to see that we brought smiles to a lot of people, and the alumni, were just really happy, and people that had been running the corps for years, were just like, oh, can you believe this? So that was really rewarding. That was fun.
It's really cool because there's so many groups that take a year off or are obliged to take a year off. And I'm thinking of you, but like Pride, it's a money thing they're going to take. And people don't know about the Pride of Cincinnati that they used to always have a year and a year off and a year and a year off. So this year people were like gasping in the sense like they're going to close. And I think the old school ones are like, no, they're not. That's what they do. But to see those groups resurface and really have a comeback, apply the plan that they wanted to. Like everyone wants to come back. I don't think there's a lot of corps that saying like we're taking a year off and in the end want to end up saying they're closing a corps or color guard. But the money situation, and maybe you're not part of this, which I hope you're not, but the money is also really a struggle now for drum corps in particular.
Well, it is. And I'm not really that involved with that aspect. I mean, that's not, my function, but we're always aware because it does influence or affect, what we can put out there. And, you have, the budgets are large. But the thing in today's world, in today's drum corps, there are so many other things you have to take care of, like financially speaking. Now, drum corps, when I march, and what it is now is, it's a different world. But, so when you think about financially, you're talking about a large amount of people teaching. It's not done by 3 or 4 people now. It's 25, 30, 50, 100 people teaching, 25 per caption, that is, so it ends up being 100 because you're on the road all the time. You can't expect adults to be on the road for 8 weeks. Yeah. And we force that upon, like at Spirit, we force that upon our staff just for mental health purposes. Like you have to get away. You can't be 24/7 for 8 weeks in a row. So we bring people in and out, but there's a cost to that, right? You got to fly them in, you got to fly them back home, you got to pay them. So you're doing a lot of that. Now drum corps, we have athletic trainers and nurses, and we have a medical team. But you got to pay for that, so there's a lot more that goes on to that. And now we're in this world of electronics, right? So, it's like, when you think about the finance aspect of like what it costs to put electronics in a show, and if you want great equipment that's going to last, and it's an investment, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, by the time you get everything. You got to transport that. You got to have the right technician. You can't just, you're not going to ask me to go work the soundboard. You have to, you wouldn't want that. They have
to be there all day rehearsals they're not just there at the show because it's a show venue.
No, exactly. So there's all that aspect. So there's a lot more to the equation. So it takes a pretty solid organization to get all of that to work together. It's a, what's the word when you, it's like I forget, it's like an act, like it's got to be so well coordinated. I always like to use the analogy of like, it's like a Cirque du Soleil.
Right.
When you think about, we go and watch the production, but I don't know if you're like me, but when I go there, I think about what goes on behind the scene. How did they get this to happen? And I'm like, it was the same thing with drum corps. Right. It's pretty sophisticated, and you have a lot of like people behind the scene doing some pretty interesting things.
The thing that people forget, and it's a good thing that they forget because that means the production is well put together, but we don't have the same amount of time. And I mean, of course, Cirque du Soleil, they're moving around the world. Like I've worked with them when I was in production and creation. I was like, they're settled there, like Old Port or whatever, for a month, 6 weeks. We put a show together, 10 minutes in and out with the production. When it's completely, it's really needs a balancing act, like you were saying. And now it's expected. The electronics type of thing is expected. When I was with Les Centaures 5 years ago, I think it was the first season we had electronics. There's 10 horns on the field, and judges and everyone are expecting us to have electronics, but they're still playing with, what is it, B bugles, like the old horns. And I'm like, So it's, and now your work. Yeah, sorry.
No, I was going to say, it's definitely, I don't know if it's is it expected? Probably they'll tell you not, somebody will tell you no, but if you want to be competitive in this age, and if you want to really produce a pretty high end product, you kind of need those tools. They're just, they're part of what's going to make it successful. So I think that, we all embark, although we all complain about it every day. It's like, it's a lot of work, and it's a lot. Sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes it works, and it's a pretty tedious operations, but it does make the shows, pretty special. Yeah. If you watch a drum corps show these days and you remove the electronic portion of it, it can be pretty boring or pretty flat. So it's one component that we added into the shows that now we can't live without. So
and you've been part of the Spartan teams for a long time now, and the organization has been known for its reputation of excellence and greatness, and a really good is it now open class? It's not open class anymore, I think.
Yeah, it's open class.
It is?
Yep.
Okay. So drum corps. And is there a different way every year you approach the production or the creativity, or to push, or because you've always been great and it's a well-oiled machine, or a combination of both maybe?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. So you know, just to give you a little bit of history. So I taught, when I was living in Boston, I taught the Spartans on a part-time base. I would go, one marching tech couldn't go on the road, and I would just go for a week just to fill in. That's how it all started. And then in 2001, I was seriously into designing shows, marching band stuff, and they asked me to become the drill writer. And I embarked, and I was there for 2001 to 2007. That was the Pasadena year. And then I moved over to the Glassman 8, 9, 10. And Spartans went into a new direction there at that time. A lot of people had left, and it was just kind of a rebuilding time. And then in 2011, a couple of people that were there before came back and were trying to put some energy into it, and they gave me a call, and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to go back. I love it. To me, it's like being home.
Yeah.
It's close to home, number one, and it's close to Montreal. So, and I also, I had lived in Boston, and that's a part of the country that I really enjoy. So I said, I'm going to go back, and I've been there ever since, believe it or not. So the process is, if I compare with Spirit, it's a little different, but it is the same in a lot of ways. There are things that we kind of do similarly. And interestingly is that I brought to the Spartans things that I thought worked really well at Spirit. And I think I try to influence Spirit in things that I thought Spartans do well, because they both did great things, but there are things that were weaker. So I'm like, hey, and I think that that's kind of brought the two groups they got better over the years because of that. So I would think I believe that, but, and then I know, but the Spartans, just to talk about that. So I'm a drill writer there. So I'm on on the creative side, and it was been a lot of the same people for a long period of time. And this past summer, we made some pretty drastic changes, and it's some people decided to move on, do other things. So we've got some new people involved, and the greatest thing is that they're young. Most of them are people that are aged out of the Spartans.
Oh yeah.
That teach or are design now, and so there's a little bit of a continuity, but with a fresh new look on things. So that's why I think to me that's kind of really interesting. And I considered myself like the old folks on the team now, and I'm really happy that the young ones are taking over, and it allows me to be a little more free. I don't have to be there. I was like, it's your, here, do your thing. But so it's again the biggest difference too is that Spartans is an open class corps, and I don't know that they want to be really competitive in that class, and it's not their goal to move up to the world class and become a world class group. They have an opportunity to do the first tour of the summer with some open world groups, and they have an opportunity to perform at quarterfinals. And they've been lucky enough that for the past, I don't know how many years, ever since that open class groups could go to quarterfinals, we made semifinals. We've never missed a semifinal. So that's pretty rewarding overall. So that's the thing. And the biggest difference also, and one of the reasons I don't think we'd want to go bring the corps to the world group, is that we cater to mostly from high school kids or kids that are in college that can't really afford to do world or can't leave for extended period of time. Our move in, Spirit moves in on Memorial Day weekend, May 25th, 26th.
So
Spartans
early.
moves in on, and it takes 5 weeks to get the show ready to what it is now. And every drum corps kind of goes through that process. And that's why when you go to the first show, those world groups are pretty impressive, because they just spent 5 weeks working on their product. The Spartans go to the first show after working for 8 days on their product.
Oh my God.
So that's the difference, right? We start teaching the show in May at Spartans on weekends, but we're missing half the kids. Because a lot of the out-of-state kids can't come every weekend, and they're in high school, so they have prom, graduation, they have all these extra activities that is part of their scholastic journey, and we're not going to mess around with that. So we just have to be patient. And when we get them on June 15th this year, we moved in. We moved in for 8 days, and then we had our first performance. And, it is what it is. Now it's taking us until, it's funny because I just talked to them this morning and they're teaching the last 15 seconds of the show today. So it's where Spirit finished the show during spring training. So that's the difference between the two, really. But both are enjoyable, and, the Spartan thing is great. And now we're entering also the open class tour. The open class tour started last night.
Why?
So now the Spartans are going to spend the rest of the summer with all groups within the open class, and then we'll see the world groups at quarterfinals on Thursday.
So my last question for today, because I feel like we're going to talk and do more of those together, but how do you balance the desire to create innovative and unique shows, but still be within the DCI sheets and realms, and make sure that you, because maybe it's a feeling, maybe it's completely when I'm outside, but when you're top 3 and even 4 or 5, if you push the envelope, you kind of know it's going to work because you have a reputation and you have the best of the best, the cream of the cream of the members and all that. But when you're in, maybe, I don't want to say lower, because they're all great and all the shows are great, but how do you balance this, the creative, unique side of things, and make sure that they're going to be successful within the sheets and where you want the groups to land?
I think if I understand your question,
lost in translation, right?
I know. Well, I could go in a lot of different directions by answering. But here's what I can tell you is that when we, as a design team, and as either Spirit or Spartans, it's the same thing, we start talking really early about next year. We'll talk about that in August, like probably in the next couple of weeks, we'll start talking about it. We'll usually meet at the end of August before band season starts here in the US. Band season is really big in October, November. We'll get together and we'll start the process. And as I was saying earlier, both groups take a different approach at how we do that. I'll talk about the Spartans in our case. We get together, we have a program coordinator, we brainstorm a bunch of ideas. We're staying together in a retreat for 3 days, and we have these placard boards all over the walls, and we just write stuff, and we start to brainstorm, and then we start to eliminate things, and we change, and usually, or it has to this point, by the time we get to the 3rd day, we get a pretty clear direction of what we want to do, right? We found a concept, a theme, and like I said, we start thinking about that in the summer, but and we come up with the show, and then it's always a question of like, all right, who are going to be our kids before we start writing this, and so then the concept doesn't necessarily change, but the level of difficulty or how far we go with it might change once we know exactly what we have for kids, and then we'll go from there. But we have some really crafty people on the design team. There's no limits to what our imagination is, and that's kind of like we come up with the craziest ideas. Some that we're like, oh my God, that's never going to happen, but it doesn't matter. We throw it out there, and you know how it is, and then we just go from there. And then we have I think the key component in all of this is that we have a really strong educational team. So our educators, the technicians, and the people that train the kids and that get them ready for the show are really on point. And there's a strong communication level between the design team and the educational team. And they are preparing the kids during the camps in the winter and the spring so that we can get this show done. I think that those are the most important key elements to make sure it's successful. In parallel, through all of that, the behind the scene is an important one. If you have great facilities to rehearse in, if you have support from your operations team, and that we're going to take care of the kids, that we're going to feed them right, that we're going to have the right place to rehearse in, rehearsing in a a field that you just mowed that morning, that doesn't really exist anymore. It still happens, but what I'm saying is that those things are they're important. So we just make sure that all those things are into place. So by the time we arrive on day one of move-ins, it's like a well-oiled machine, and all we need to do is get the show on, ready. But yeah, I don't know if that answered your question or not, or
it did. Like you said, there's so many angles of this. So as we conclude, thank you, of course. And I guess all the socials, Spirit of Atlanta and Spartans, we can find them on all the social media if you know.
Yeah, you can. So I will be honest, I am not a big social media person. By choice. And but I know they exist on social media. So that's all I can say. Either it's Facebook or Instagram or some, I don't know if there's any others they're on, but they definitely are. And that's, that's how, how it is. Kids these days, they live off of that. And so I know it's there. But I couldn't tell you much about it because I tend to stay away from them.
So the ones that want to go and follow them, Spirit of Atlanta, Spartans, Drum and Bugle Corps on Instagram and Facebook. Their history, give them support, write nice things to the members. They have access to their phone all the time, and they're on the road quite a lot. So I know kids are on the social media, and they want to hear people that they don't know and have support from everyone. So you do that. Merci beaucoup, Gilles. Merci infiniment.
Oui, ça m'a fait énormément plaisir.
C'est vraiment très cool.
Ça m'a fait peur un peu. Je me disais, oh mon Dieu, qu'est-ce qu'elle va me demander? Mais c'est bien le fun, hein? It was a lot of fun.
It was really fun. But don't move because this needs to be uploaded so we hear you. Okay. But to everyone else, whether you're a well-known person in the marching activity or if you're simply someone who wants to have a conversation with me, this podcast is all about giving everyone a chance to be heard. Everyone has a voice, and now I have a platform. So you can reach me, Cynthia Bernard, on Instagram or Facebook, or you can write to onawaterbreak@gmail.com, and I will be glad to talk to you about any word or anything you want to in the realms of the marching arts. So merci, Gilles. Talk to you really soon, and talk to you soon. Reste là, bouge pas.